Okay, students, so now we're going to talk about the actual events of the War of 1812. And look, I've been liberated to the dining room again. Um, I've tried to include some dates on some of these things because in the way it's presented in your book, which is where I draw this information from, um, it's not always in sequential order. It sort of rotates back and forth between what's going on the American side and what's going on the British side. So eventually in class, we're going to make somewhat of a little timeline because I think otherwise you're going to lose track of how and when things happened. So the people who were yelling for war expected a quick and easy victory, and I'm not sure why. Britain was still the biggest, meanest dog on the planet in 1812. And remember, Jefferson had cut military spending. And even though Adams had been the father of the United States Navy, Jefferson had cut spending on that too. And the United States was unprepared for war. So another thing that was going on is that the British had been battling against helping to battle back Napoleon over in Europe. And at the beginning of the War of 1812, and as it moves into 13 and 14, Napoleon is being defeated. And so as the war goes on, they are able to concentrate more and more and focus better and better on North America rather than having their troops spread in two different places. Okay, our actual army at the beginning of the War of 1812 had less than 12,000 soldiers. That's what their job was, and most of those were brand new recruits. There were state militias, but these were poorly trained soldiers. These were just, farmers that could pick up a gun if they needed to. The commanders with experience were those that were left over from the Revolution, and these people were old at this point and really not able to be of much value because they're old. I mean, they really couldn't help out much. And so, like I said in this parentheses, time to make some new legends, which is exactly what happened. At the first battle where American troops tried to invade Canada, I guess they're trying to make good on Clay's initiative, which was ridiculous. They suffer a huge defeat, and they have to surrender at the Battle of Detroit on July 11th of 1812. So the very first battle against the British, they lose in a giant, huge way. Now, let's talk about naval strength. I told you William Henry Harrison is a person you need to remember. And because he's going to become president later on. But he's like, well, if we're going to have any kind of influence here, we have to control the Great Lakes. And that is very good thinking on his part. Part of this is because he's from Indiana. And Indiana borders the Great Lakes. And so those states, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, they know how important those Great Lakes are. So that's good thinking on his part. Now, by the time of the War of 1812, we don't have a giant, huge navy, especially because Jefferson's cut spending on it. But if you remember way back when, during the Navigation Acts, like back in the 1600s, at first the British said you could only you could only do your shipping in ships built in England. And then they decided, well, this is foolishness. Why not allow the colonies to build their own ships? And instead of just hauling the wood over here to England to build the ships, we'll just build them over there in the colonies. And they'll still be British ships after all. But what happened over 200 years was the colonists and then the Americans got very good at building ships. They got so good at it that they were building the fastest and most nimble, easily to turn, easily to navigate ships on the planet by the time of 1812. So they had the best technology as far as shipbuilding by the time 1812 comes around. Again, they don't have the most highly probably loaded down with weapons, but theirs are the most agile and nimble as far as being able to attack and maneuver. Now, to complement this group of fast Navy ships, these people are very good with privateering. They've known how to do it, and they're good at it. So while the United States does not have a really good, Navy like you think of the British Royal Navy, not like that, but we can muster some strength when it comes to the Navy. Oliver Hazard Perry, he's a name you might be tested on, so I would probably pay a little bit of attention, is in charge of the naval forces on Lake Erie. And that's important because it's at the top of Ohio, the northern part. You can tell I'm not the geography teacher. And his job was to assemble forces to get the British out of Lake Erie. And the Battle of Lake Erie, and this is only September 10th, 1813, is considered a turning point. This is very early on in the war, but it's considered a turning point of the War of 1812. A turning point in the Western War, let's put it that way. The war on the western side of the Appalachians. This is a turning point. And he sends this message. It's pretty famous, these words. We have met the enemy and they are ours. He sends this to William Henry Harrison, who's the general in this area. He's the one that was talking to Tecumseh, remember? He's the one that attacked the Prophet's Village. And so Harrison is not the Navy guy, okay? Perry is the Navy guy. Harrison is the general in control of the area. All right. So the British and their Native American friends begin to withdraw back into Canada after Lake Erie. And when they come out of Detroit and leave that area, Harrison cuts them off at the Battle of the Thames. The Battle of the Thames is important, and here's why. Tecumseh is killed at this battle. Now, that's important for a lot of reasons. It's demoralizing to the Native Americans and is a huge morale boost to the U.S. folks that this guy was shot and killed at this battle, because he's a fearsome warrior, and he was a great Native American leader, and to know that he has been taken out now is a good thing if you're the Americans. The U.S. forces also attack York, which later becomes Toronto, and they burn the Parliament building there to the ground. Again, this is part of Clay's initiative. I'm sure they're invading Canada. And truthfully, if they can make the British see that they mean business, if they can drive them out and make them see that they mean business by attacking them on their own land, say, get out of the forts, stay out of the forts, stay out of the United States. We can come here and attack you on your own soil, so leave us alone. I'm sure there's a reason, that does make good sense. Trying to take Canada and make it United States doesn't make sense, but trying to deal a little smackdown here does make some sense. Burning the Parliament building to the ground was a little bit of overkill, and we get a little bit of payback later on for that, and you'll see how. All right, let's talk about the Native Americans. Again, the Native Americans are on the side of the British in this fight. There's no alliance of Native Americans after Tecumseh's death, okay? And a lot of the Native Americans will run then and run into Canada and be with the British. And the Native Americans now will not side so much with them openly because, as I said since the beginning, the Native Americans are not stupid people. They want to be with the winner. And they realize that to openly side with the British is foolishness. But there is still Native American resistance in the South. And this was especially true with the Creeks. Now, one Andrew Jackson was not going to put up with this. And at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and this probably is worth remembering, 550 Creek warriors were cut off and massacred at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Mississippi Territory. You can't see what's in my parentheses, so I'm going to explain it really quickly because I'm only going to go through half of this at this point. There had been a place in Alabama called Fort Mims, and these Creek Indians were really terrorizing the South. And there had been a bunch of people who run into this little, and it was a sad sack excuse for a fort, but Fort Mims. And there were men, women, and children. And 250 of them had gone into this fort to try to seek asylum to get away from these Creek Native American tribe. And the Creeks surrounded this fort and killed every single one of these people. It's called the Fort Mims Massacre. And they didn't just kill them. They scalped them, cut off their heads, and put them on pikes all around in the surrounding area, the counties and this countryside along this area. And Andrew Jackson had heard about this, and he saw what happened. I mean, you could see it, and was furious over it. And he said they'll pay, and this was his way of making them pay, because he could take U.S. soldiers and get them cut off so they couldn't retreat at Horseshoe Bend. And a lot of times in U.S. history, this is portrayed as such a terrible massacre on the part of the United States, but it wasn't unprovoked. I think you should know both sides. All right, let's talk about the British offensive. By August 1814, the British are completely able to focus on their problems in the U.S. because Napoleon is finally taken care of completely in Europe. They sail into Chesapeake Bay, launch an all-out attack on Washington, D.C., and burn the White House. I think it's probably in retaliation for burning the Parliament building. But they're not really wanting to stay and take over Washington, D.C. That's not their objective, okay? However, Dolly Madison becomes hugely important. I'll explain more in class. James and Dolly Madison have to flee Washington, D.C. Obviously, he's the president. They want him out of there. And she's famous for saving a lot of the artwork and the archives, things like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. She's responsible for saving those documents. So they don't try to hold Washington, D.C. They attack in September, but they go on to Baltimore. They're trying to get control of the ports, the same old strategy that they used before. But the people in Baltimore hold them off with the help of artillery fire from Fort McHenry, which is nearby in Baltimore. As the bombing continues overnight, a very unimportant lawyer named Francis Scott Key was stuck on a ship out in the harbor. And you couldn't tell what was going on. All you knew was that there was this bombing and artillery shell back and forth. And the general at the fort had ordered the women in the area to make a giant, huge American flag so that they could run it up on the flagpole. So the British are sort of like, we're here. You can see that we're here. And Key could see this from out in the harbor. And so he realized that if you could still see the flag in the morning, that the Americans had not been defeated. And so there you have it. That's how we got the Star-Spangled Banner. He wrote the poem. And then the poem was later put to the tune of a British drinking song that you would sing in a pub, but not actually adopted as our national anthem until 1931. Okay, I'm going to stop this here and then pick it up from here in the next screencast.